Welcome to this week's exploration of contemporary leadership topics. A course in contemporary leadership would not be complete without a discussion of gender and leadership. What is the status of women in leadership? What successes are we seeing? What are the challenges? Where do we go next? This presentation introduces the subject of gender and leadership and places emphasis on this week's readings. This week's presentation is organized around the areas you see on this slide. First, we'll take a brief look at research findings in the area of gender and leadership. This provides an objective method for examining and drawing conclusions about current issues in gender and leadership. Next, we'll briefly examine the metaphors that have been popularized by researchers and writers in the field of gender and leadership. Metaphors are very useful devices for advancing mutual comprehension. In other words, they help us to communicate with one another about what we see, feel, or understand. The most well-known metaphor in the area of gender and leadership is the glass ceiling, the picture of the barrier that women can't break through in order to reach the executive ranks in organizations. We also will explore the challenges that women face in their leadership journeys, and we will conclude with next steps. In other words, what are the implications for organizations and what are the implications for women leaders? A recently published Harvard Business Review article entitled Women in the Workplace, a Research Roundup, presents an overview of research from a variety of fields, business, psychology, sociology, and compares women's and men's experiences at work. This slide presents several highlights of particular interest and places focus on a large-scale study of 360-degree leadership evaluations. In 360-degree evaluations, the leader is rated by employees, peers, and bosses, hence the title 360. The findings were extraordinary. On 12 of 16 leadership performance dimensions, women actually scored higher than men. Now, we often think that women should or will perform better versus men on communication-related dimensions. And though that assumption might not always hold, the data did support it in this study. However, women also performed higher on a variety of non-communication related dimensions as well. So these data certainly would confirm women's promotability. Yet, additional research studies indicated that women are still less well represented in the senior management ranks, and they may be less likely to get the large budget important projects and assignments. Moreover, there is still a wage gap. Let's look at some additional data. And here I'm tying together the HBR Research Roundup and the Carter and Silva article entitled Women in Management, Delusions of Progress. It's an interesting yet complex picture to be sure, but there is good news to report. First, self-report data from women high achievers show that women are not pushed out of their job positions once they start a family. Second, we know that more women than ever are earning advanced professional degrees, such as MBAs, and that's important because such degrees are career advancement drivers. Third, surveys of graduating MBAs showed that women and men are equally confident about getting a job offer post-graduation, particularly in general management and consulting. But here is where the picture becomes more complex. So even though women report that they're not pushed out of job positions when they start a family, mothers may be less likely hired in the first place, or they may receive a lower starting salary versus women without children. And the first post-MBA job for women tends to be a lower level versus for men. And finally, women are confident about a post-MBA job offer in the area of general management, but the data show they're less confident about securing a job in finance, even though the data also show that women are just as likely as men to receive a job offer in the area of finance. So we see advances, and we also see some areas of challenge. There are organizational biases to address, and there may be career development implications as well. So for example, how might we encourage qualified women MBAs to apply for jobs in fields such as finance? In the 1980s, a Wall Street Journal article popularized the term glass ceiling to describe what occurs when women are trying to advance to the C-suite in organizations, i.e., they hit an invisible barrier, the glass ceiling, and they can't break through it. To this day, the glass ceiling metaphor has been used to describe women's experience in organizations. More recently, researchers and writers Alice Eagley and Linda Carley have proposed a new metaphor, and one they say is more representative of women's experience. Their thesis is that while women are underrepresented in the executive ranks, some have broken through. 2017 data from the S&P 500 show that 5.9% of the CEO positions in the S&P 500 are held by women. That's 29 women CEOs in the S&P 500. So Eagley and Carley acknowledge that underrepresentation, but they propose a different way of describing what is occurring, and they call it the labyrinth. Their Harvard Business Review article entitled Women and the Labyrinth of Leadership is considered a significant contribution to the field, hence its appearance in our course. A brief quote from the article explains the labyrinth metaphor. As a contemporary symbol, it conveys the idea of a complex journey toward a goal worth striving for. Passage through a labyrinth is not simple or direct, but requires persistence, awareness of one's progress, and a careful analysis of the puzzles that lie ahead. So this metaphor does not preclude advancement, but it suggests a complex journey with many twists and turns. Two additional metaphors are proposed by the Center for Creative Leadership's podcast entitled Women in Leadership, Navigating the Narrow Band and Balance Beam. Building on Eagley and Carley's labyrinth metaphor, the narrow band and the balance beam represent the sorts of challenges and obstacles that women might have to confront along the way. The narrow band refers to leadership style challenges and having a, quote, narrow range of acceptable behaviors, unquote, to work with. So for example, for women it may be important to appear competitive, but not overly aggressive. The balance beam refers to the area of work-life balance and the challenges associated with fulfilling multiple life roles. The challenges, obstacles, and barriers that women may encounter in the labyrinth are ones that we'll explore further in this week's class discussions. Carter and Silva have researched the impact of the first boss on women's careers, and their findings actually suggest that women and men may have different first boss experiences, something that can impact career trajectory. Eagley and Carley say that in the labyrinth, women may encounter resistance to their leadership, challenges having to do with how their leadership style is perceived, the quote-unquote likability competitiveness challenge, work-life balance conflict, and challenges related to networking. Most recently, Ibarra, Eli, and Kolb have weighed in with a description for these sorts of challenges. They call it second-generation gender bias. Second-generation gender bias refers to, and I'm quoting here, subtle and often invisible barriers for women that arise from cultural assumptions and organizational structures, practices, and patterns of interaction that inadvertently benefit men while putting women at a disadvantage. This could include role models, informal networks, career paths based on outdated assumptions, and assumptions about leadership style that could put women at a disadvantage. Taken together, the research and readings have important implications for next steps. These implications lie at both the organizational and the personal career management levels. At the organizational level, we see a series of recommendations that are emerging really across the readings. These include reworking feedback and performance evaluation systems to ensure objectivity and fairness, implementing coaching and mentoring, and putting into place what Ibarra, Eli, and Kolb call safe spaces, such as women's leadership development networks. Stretch assignments and methods for addressing work-life balance also figure prominently. From the personal career management side, the Center for Creative Leadership podcast entitled 5 Key Themes for High-Achieving Women Leaders offers a compelling and research-based view that harks back to our discussion of authentic leadership. In addition to exercising agency, i.e., taking control of one's career path, the podcast calls for women leaders and aspiring women leaders to be authentic, i.e., genuine, to build relationships, to reflect on leadership purpose, values, motivations, and to aim for a whole and integrated life that reflects one's values and priorities, which is something different from aiming for an equal balance of all of one's roles. What are your thoughts on this week's readings and research findings? How do they fit with your own experiences in work organizations? I greatly look forward to discussing these themes and your perspective on this week's discussion boards.